Hello students, welcome to the channel. In today's video, we'll solve the second reading passage, the social science passage of the June 2020 ACT Form C02. So let's begin. This passage is adapted from the book Brave Companions, Portraits in History by David McCullough. It was not long after the completion of the Panama Railroad in 1855 that Bedford Clapperton Pym declared with perfect composure that of all the world's wonders, none could surpass this one as a demonstration of man's capacity to do great things against impossible odds. I've seen the greatest engineering works of the day, he wrote, but I must confess that when passing backwards and forwards on the Panama Railway, I have never been more struck than with the evidence, apparent on every side, of the wonderful skill, endurance, and perseverance which must have been exercised in its construction. Bedford Clapperton Pym was a British naval officer and of no particular historical significance. He had, however, seen a great deal of the world. He was a recognized authority on Central America, and his opinion was not lightly arrived at. It should be kept in mind that the first railroads, all very primitive, had been built in Europe and the US only some 20 years before. France was still virtually without railroads. Not a rail had been put down west of the Mississippi as yet. Moreover, such awesome technological strides as the Suez Canal, the Union Pacific, and the Brooklyn Bridge were still well in the future. And so the vision of locomotives highballing through the green half-light of some distant rainforest of the world's two greatest oceans, joined by good English-made rails, could stir the blood to an exceptional degree. So this basically establishes the history of the Panama Railroad, which was completed in 1855, and the views of this British naval official are presented to indicate that it was a technological marvel. And also this was one of the first major railway access points, because proper railways had only been built some 20 years before. So this was a big deal. The Panama Railroad was begun in 1850 at the height of the California gold craze, and by anyone's standards, it was a stunning demonstration of man's wonderful skill, endurance, and perseverance, just as Pym said, even though its full length was only 47.5 miles. It was, for example, the first ocean-to-ocean railroad. Mile for mile, it also appears to have cost more in dollars and in human life than any railroad ever built. The surveys made by its builders produced important geographic revelations that had a direct bearing on the decision to build the Panama Canal along the same route. In addition, the diplomatic agreement upon which the whole venture rested, the so-called Bidlack Treaty of 1846, was the basis of all subsequent involvement of the United States in Panama. So this kind of brings the background to the building of the Panama Railroad and also the diplomatic effort that was put into it. Still, the simple fact that it was built remains the overriding wonder, given the astonishing difficulties that had to be overcome and the means at hand in the 1850s. Present-day engineers who have had experience in jungle construction wonder how in the world it was ever managed. I think in particular of David S. Parker, an eminent army engineer whom I interviewed at the time he was governor of the Canal Zone. Through a great sweep of glass behind him, as we talked, were the distant hills of Panama, no different in appearance than they ever were. It is almost inconceivable, he said, that the railroad survey, just the survey, could have been made by a comparative handful of men who had no proper equipment for topographic reconnaissance, no helicopters, no recourse to aerial photography, no modern medicines, nor the least understanding of the causes of malaria or yellow fever. There was no such thing as an insect repellent, no bulldozers, no chainsaws, no canned goods, not one reliable map. So this paragraph kind of brings out the challenges that the builders of Panama Railroad must have experienced. Not only were there challenges with regard to the development, the construction work, but challenges of working in a jungle setting where malaria or yellow fever were rampant. A Panama Railroad still crosses from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from Colon to Panama City. Much of the ride, especially if you are in one of the older cars without air conditioning, windows open wide, looks and feels as it must have originally. The full trip takes 1 hour and 30 minutes, but except for a few miles at either end, the present line is altogether different from the original. It takes a different route on higher ground. The old road has vanished beneath Gayton Lake, the enormous body of fresh water that comprises most of the canal and that can be seen close by on the right, much of the way as you head towards the Pacific. The original line was built as hurriedly and cheaply as circumstances would allow to take advantage of the bonanza in California traffic. The route was always along the line of least resistance. Anything formidable in the way, a hill, a bend in the Chagres River, was bypassed if possible. No tunnels were attempted. There is one on the present line, and the winding right of way chopped through the jungle was just wide enough to let a train pass. Still, this one little stretch of track took nearly 5 years to build and cost $8 million, which averages out to a little less than 10 miles a year, and then unheard of $168,000 per mile. So the last paragraph kind of brings out the challenges of building the railroad and the cost and the formidable capacity that had to be put in. Okay, the main purpose of the passage is to explain why the completion of the original Panama Railroad is both puzzling and impressive. Compare the construction challenges of the Panama Railroad with those of the Panama Canal. Contrast features of the original Panama Railroad with those of the new line. Provide a historical overview of the origins of the US's involvement in Panama. So this is A, right? We are basically looking at how this railroad came to be built and how the completion was puzzling. It was almost impossible to achieve at that time, and yet impressive because it was done. One reason the passage author points out the length of the Panama Railroad is to indicate how close the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans are to each other in Panama, how expensive the railroad project was despite its short length, why the railroad survey took a relatively short amount of time to complete, why the tracks were built just wide enough to let a train pass. So this is, I think this comes, there are two places where he mentions the length. One is here. Yeah, much of the ride, but except a few miles at either end, the original line along the line of the no tunnels were attempted. So this one little stretch of track nearly, yeah, so I think one part is this, that, yeah, but I don't think that is why it's mentioned. 1 second. Yeah, even though its full length was only 47.5 miles, it was the first ocean-to-ocean railroad. Mile for mile, it appears to have cost more in dollars, right? So it is about the expenses, right? Yeah, G. Okay. In the passage, the author characterizes the construction of the Panama Railroad as complex yet routine, grueling yet brief, incomplete and rushed, costly and dangerous. So I think it's here. The original line was built as hurriedly and cheaply as the circumstances would allow, right? So it was, I wouldn't say it was dangerous. It wasn't, it was grueling for sure, right? And it was brief because it was done hurriedly. So I'll go with B. Wait, I think it would be costly and dangerous because this is definitely costly. This kind of tells you that it was, 1 second, costly. And dangerous for sure comes from here, right? That there was, but then it's also brief. Um, no modern medicine. So that is dangerous, right? Yeah, but I think D is a better answer. So I'll go with that. Yeah, D is better. The main purpose of the second paragraph. Should I just look at the first one again? Okay. The main purpose of the second paragraph, lines 7 to 13. I've never seen, I've seen the greatest engineering works of the day. I've never been more struck with the evidence of the wonderful skill. A first-hand account of the experience of helping build the original line, details about what the original line looked like, evidence to support the idea that Pym was knowledgeable about Central America. Yeah, an excerpt from Pym's writing that demonstrates his enthrallment with the Panama Railroad. Yeah, because it's not really giving you details of what it looked like, right? It's just he's simply impressed by it. The main idea of the sixth paragraphs, 40 to 46. The surveys made by the builders produced important geographic revelations that had a direct bearing on the decision. In addition, the diploma. So this gives you the background, right? Is that the Bidlin Treaty was the catalyst for the Panama Bidlin Treaty and surveys project laid the foundation for the Panama Canal? Yes. Railroad surveys by an important discovery. United States world. Yeah, so it's B, right? How this um, surveys, they laid the foundation for the Panama Canal and future US involvement. The main purpose of the lists in 59 to 65. Yeah, so this kind of brings out the challenges, right? Uh, yeah, so the main purpose indicate the range of obstacles the builders of the railroad faced, describe the kind of tools the surveyors would have used, identify the steps involved, suggest the kinds of problems. No, it's F, right? The kind of obstacles they must have faced. The passage indicates that Pym's perspective on the Panama Railroad is authoritative, partly because he was a British naval officer who was an expert on railroad construction, important historical figure, traveled the world extensively, had written reviews. So he was a naval officer, but he had seen a great deal of the world, right? So that's why. Had written, yeah, so it's C. It is as used in line 18, the word lightly most nearly means. Um, his opinion was not lightly arrived at. It was not arrived at without due consideration, due thought, carelessly. It wasn't carelessly arrived at. It can reasonably be inferred from the passage that the present line of the Panama Railroad was built on higher ground because the builders needed to create a more scenic route for tourists, allow for the construction of the canal, offer a more direct route from Colon to Panama, make it easier for the train cars. Okay. The route was always along at Panama, still crosses. Much of the ride looks, the full trip takes 1 hour, but except for the present line is altogether. Yeah, the old, it takes a different route on, because the old lake road has vanished between, comprises most of the canal that can be seen. Yeah, so it's vanished under that, right? So, uh, yeah, so it's because to allow for the construction of the canal, because the construction of the canal ensured that the old road vanished. Yes. Based on the passage, which of the following statements best describes a feature of the current railroad that did not exist when it was first constructed? The railroad bypasses bends in the Chagres River, travels through a tunnel, connects the Atlantic and Pacific. Yeah, so it connects through a tunnel because that's obviously something that wasn't present earlier. No tunnels were attempted then, but there is a tunnel on the present line. Okay, so let's grade this. 1 second. Yeah, so this is reading and question 11 to 20. Yeah, okay. AGDJB, AGDJB, FCHBG, FCHBG. Okay, so we got all correct. Hope this was useful. If it was, hit like and subscribe to the channel. I'll link in the description box to the solutions to the other sections of this test, English, Math, and Science. And this completes the solutions for the first two passages of reading. So do check back later for solutions to the remaining reading passages. I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye-bye.